Okay, guys, good morning. Welcome back again. Hope you're doing good and having a nice start today. We have like under a minute, and then we'll get the review session going. But nice to be with you guys, and hope your other classes are going well as we get to the finals. Hi, Violetta, Brianna, Delilah, John, Daniel, AJ. Welcome, everyone. Okay. Okay, I've just got the study guide pulled up. It's 8:30, so welcome back and good morning, everyone. As you guys know, we have one last live stream right now, and this will kind of cap off the semester in terms of meetings, but you have your final exam next week, so that's one last important thing, of course, for you to take care of. And I'll just remind you of the exact time and date. It's a week from today, so it's Thursday the 20th, from 9 a.m. to 10:50. So all you have to do is just be ready at 9 a.m. next Thursday to take this exam, and I'll be mailing you the test form just as I have with the other quizzes and other exams just before 9 a.m. And then you'll get the full test period to just complete your answers and return them back to me. And so, I mean, that's that. We know the date and time. Other than this, we know that today is our last day to review the study guide. So what I was thinking, and welcome everyone that's arriving. Thank you guys for being here on our last day before the final. What I was kind of thinking is that because we spent some good time on Tuesday going over the first half of the questions, and we looked at stuff from chapter 8 and some of the stuff from chapter 1, I thought now maybe we'll focus on the stuff that's after the midterm. And for anybody that really wants to do some more detailed review of prior to the midterm material, you can also replay the video from our earlier review session that we had before the midterm. So you'll still be able to look at some review of that material if you go back to that video. And for today then, I think let's focus mostly all on the second half. So I'm gonna get us started again with the study guide by looking at the material from chapter 5 down. So I would ask you to go ahead and pull up your own copy if you don't have it pulled up yet. And let's go through it together. And like I say, as with the Tuesday review session, it's best to have students lead the meeting and have students provide most of the responses. And speed is good. If we can get through more, that's obviously better. Hopefully we can get through the whole second half of this list. Also, thank you guys for the homework that you've just now submitted, the last homework. I'm going to work right away finishing the grading of this and try to make sure I'm done no later than Monday night. Then I'll announce for everybody that you can check in with me for your grades for the whole class, for that assignment, or just anything else. And then you'll know exactly how you stand going into the final. All right, so if there's any questions anytime or anything that comes into your mind that you want to put in this chat, just let me know and we'll take them as they come. But let's just get it started then, if that sounds good to you. So starting with the, I guess, first question from the chapter 5 notes. Somebody here, based off of your memory, your notes, the book, whatever, tell me if you can, what is a fallacy? Who thinks they know what is a fallacy? So we'll start with that, and then we'll move through all the fallacies as quick as we can. So question, what's a fallacy? Let's see. It just takes a minute to type it up and get the information out there. No class next week. I mean, there's a final exam next week on Thursday, but there's no class on Tuesday. That's right, Ashley. The schedule changes after this 15th week. Finals week, at least most all the time, there's just one set time and date for the exam. And a lot of times it's not even the same day or time as the class period. But anyway, there's only one thing next week for you for this class, which is Thursday morning, the final at 9 a.m. Okay, good. So Daniel, when an argument has a logical flaw or error, correct. So fallacies are like bad arguments. They are flawed arguments. They're arguments that, as you wrote, contains some type of error or logical flaw, and that makes it a weak argument where the premises don't give the right support to the conclusion. So when you see fallacious arguments, you're supposed to point them out, call them out, and just note that that's not a valid argument. So by knowing what the different fallacies are, it gives us a better ability to identify them when people use them and to try our best to avoid making them ourselves. So that's what a fallacy is. Good, Daniel. Now, there are three categories of fallacies that everyone here studied. Fallacies of ambiguity, fallacies of relevance, fallacies of unwarranted assumption. And within those three categories, there's a number of items that are found. Let's start then with the topic of fallacy of ambiguity. What is a fallacy of ambiguity overall? What type of fallacy is that? What makes a fallacy of ambiguity? So let's hear what you think that means. And if you're looking at the study guide, which I hope some of you are, you can anticipate to the next question, and so you can be thinking ahead in terms of what I will ask you next. But yeah, so the next number 2 question on the study guide, what is a fallacy of ambiguity now? And it's part of the design to have the questions typed into the live chat, because that creates a permanent record that you can then refer to in a typed form when you come back to watch the replay. So it helps to organize our review, and it's good for your reference. Hi, Tiandra. Okay, so good, Delilah. Arguments that contain ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or confusion between two similar concepts. Correct, yes. Thank you, guys. Roxana, Ashley, Delilah. That's the right definition. And so fallacy of ambiguity has that kind of problem, that in the argument there's something ambiguous, maybe there's a confusion between two similar concepts, or the grammar is confusing or sloppy, all right? And so underneath the heading of fallacy of ambiguity, we have a couple of different items. So there's, first of all, equivocation. Let me know if you can remember, what is the equivocation fallacy? How does one commit this error, the fallacy of equivocation? What do you think about that one? Okay, good. When a key term in an argument is used more than once with different meanings. Exactly. So I don't know if I say, like, we had this one kind of basic example. Joe's at a bank. Banks are financial institutions, so he's at a financial institution. Yeah, it seems like that could be a good one, but the word bank could be interpreted to have different meanings. Maybe we're talking about bank in the sense of a river bank at first in the first premise, then we switch to financial bank in the second premise. That means that the whole conclusion doesn't come from those premises because we changed the meaning of one of the terms. So you have to use words in a standard, uniform way. Otherwise, you equivocate on the term, and then that makes it a fallacy. And so that happens a lot, both in advertising, in everyday life, in political messaging, media messaging, equivocation. Okay, so then next, what is amphibole? The amphibole fallacy. What do you know about that kind of fallacy? Okay, good. Thanks again, Caleb. So then that's when, and also Daniel, when there's a grammatical ambiguity in the argument, which allows more than one conclusion to be drawn. Right. So grammatical ambiguity can happen in a few different ways. Maybe it's a case of not knowing to what a term refers or to what a pronoun refers. If we say that John and Steve were having a conversation about his car, we just don't know who it is that owns the car because there were two different male subjects, and then the pronoun his was used ambiguously to refer to one of them, but without clarification, we just don't know which one. So amphibole, grammatical ambiguity fallacy. What about accent fallacy? What's this one? Let's see if we can say that. The accent fallacy. Good, okay, so when the meaning of an argument or statement changes based on which word or phrase within it is emphasized, yes. So by placing emphasis on a word or phrase, you can sometimes alter its intended meaning. Like the case in the book, one of them. was mom comes home, house has been burned down, daughter did it. Mom says to daughter, what? Come on, why did you do that? I told you so many times not to play with matches, didn't I? Daughter claps back and says, yeah, I know. That's because I wasn't playing with matches. I was doing a science experiment with matches. So this wasn't actually playtime for me. Now, in that case, by hanging on the word playing and getting that extra emphasis in there, she shifts the meaning around from like don't touch matches or use them anyway to you can use them as long as you don't play games with them. And obviously that would have been a deviation from the real message given. So sometimes with an accent, the meaning of a concept or statement can change. Okay, so then next would be division. Maybe you can tell me what the division fallacy is. Division. Something about a characteristic, something about it being assumed, but what is that? Okay, so good, Daniel. One falsely, incorrectly, erroneously infers that a characteristic of a group is a characteristic of each member of the group. Exactly. Yeah, so let me think. Women earn less money than men on average as a group. And so what if somebody said, therefore, your mom makes less money than your dad? Well, that would not be necessarily a valid argument, because just because the overall group as an average matter makes less doesn't mean that an individually selected woman has to be a lower earner than a given man. So it's just like men are taller than women, but it doesn't mean that every man is taller than every woman. So sometimes a feature which is seen in the whole is not seen in every part within the whole. And that's the kind of fallacy that is committed when that is not noted. So that's division fallacy. The form that it sometimes takes is that like some individual is a member of a group G, and group G has a characteristic, so the individual has to have the same characteristic. But it's not always true. Okay. Then there would be composition, which is like the reverse, but maybe you can just say quickly what you think that is. Composition fallacy. It's kind of a similar wording, but just turned around the opposite direction. Yeah, so composition. Good. Characteristic of a member of a group is erroneously assumed to be a characteristic of the whole group. Like saying that the cells in my body cannot be seen without a microscope, and therefore, since my body's made out of the cells, my body can't be seen without a microscope. That would obviously be false. In this case, a feature of each part of me is not a feature of the whole thing when they combine. The room is small in the hotel. This does not imply that the hotel itself is small, which is made out of all the rooms, because you can have a big, big hotel with a ton of tiny rooms. So yeah, sometimes people make an incorrect assumption that a feature one member has is a feature that a group of which they are a part has. Maybe, let me think. Yeah, so this NFL quarterback was a domestic abuser, and he's on the Giants or something, and then you say, so the Giants are like a team that's full of abusers and criminals. Not necessarily, just because one person was. So you can't necessarily associate a whole thing having a characteristic just because one member has it. Or maybe even if all the members have it, it can still be the case that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So then next, we got through the fallacies of ambiguity. That's good. Made good short work of that. We're asking about fallacies of relevance next. So that's the second big category. What is the fallacy of relevance overall? What type of fallacy is that one? Okay, good, Delilah. So when one or more of the premises in the argument is unrelated or is irrelevant to the conclusion. Oh, Peachy's back. Yeah, correct. So remember what an argument is. Okay, an argument is an attempt to, prove a claim based on evidence. And in an argument, you have a conclusion that you're trying to show to be true, and you have premises that are given as like reasons to back that up. But obviously, it's a bad argument if the reasons that you're using, the premises, are not even relevant to the conclusion. If they're not relevant to it, then they're not good evidence for it. So that would be a problem. Now, let's go over the different individual members of this category. One fallacy of relevance is called ad hominem. Sometimes it's just called personal attack, but what is the personal attack or slash ad hominem fallacy? Okay, there you go. Good, Daniel. So instead of presenting a logical counter-argument, the individual attacks the person who presented the argument. Right. So say that a person was presenting an argument to you towards some conclusion, but instead of telling them why the argument was wrong, you make it personal and you go into an argument, like you get into a personal attack against them. So, and you use the personal attack as the reason their argument is invalid, which is totally irrelevant. Like if somebody said to you, hey, you know, global warming is real, look at all this data that science seems to indicate, you know, shows that it exists. And you say to them, no way, you don't, I mean, that's not true because you're ugly. I mean, that wouldn't make any good sense. Whether the person you thought was, you know, good looking or not, it doesn't have anything to do with their argument. Does that really show that they had a bad argument? So when you don't agree with the person's conclusion of an argument, you're supposed to show why their evidence is not correct or why the evidence does not imply that conclusion, or you can present your own evidence towards the contrary. But it makes no sense to just attack the person because that's not the point. The point is whether their argument is correct or incorrect. So whether they have bad breath, poor music taste, you know, they did something irresponsible in the past that has nothing to do with the argument that you're hearing now, that would be all personal stuff. You're supposed to just attack the argument if you don't like it, but not the person. Okay. Appeal to force. What is that? They sometimes call it scare tactics. But anyway, appeal to force, scare tactics. What do you think? What's this one? Appeal to force, right. So the use or threat of force in an attempt to get another person to accept a conclusion is correct, right? You're talking to your boss, you're talking to them about your views concerning a matter of US policy, and you give them a detailed argument why you believe that. And then they say, you know what though, you better change your mind if you want to keep working here. Now, that's not really a way of trying to point out that they made a bad argument or why their assumptions are false. It's just threatening them. It's saying, basically believe this or else. So that's the kind of like nature of the scare tactic fallacy. Believe what I'm saying or change your mind or else. And the or else is like some implied threat or even the actual application of force or a threat. It can be done in a case where someone holds power over you and they can use that as leverage to get you to change your mind to theirs or to at least silence you into agreement. But you know, when you want people to agree with you, you're not supposed to just sort of bully them into doing it. You're supposed to try and make a rational argument. And if they don't agree with your argument, then you haven't made a good enough case. So an appeal to force is really a sign of weakness, if anything. It just makes it clear that the person does not have like the skill and ability to make a rational argument and instead has to resort to displays of hostility and threatening behavior. Okay, so then we can go to appeal to pity. Appeal to pity, it's almost self-explanatory, but you could just say, I guess, a word or two about it. What do you think? Appeal to pity. Another one. Pity. Appeal to pity. Some know it as appeal to emotion. What do you think? Good, Delilah. So pity is invoked in an argument, but it's not relevant to the conclusion. Good. There's a lot of examples that were given in the book where, like say it's a traffic stop, or someone's talking to their professor and asking for an extension, or maybe some other authority figure who has the power to make a decision about that individual and they want them to make a favorable decision. So in any case where there's an appeal to pity, the request for special treatment or consideration is like not merited because it's insignificant by comparison to the thing that they're being expected to do. So like if a police officer saw you speeding at a high rate and you just said, I'm sorry, I was distracted because I keep on thinking about what's happening in India with the, outrageous pandemic kind of exploding over there, and it's bothering me. So, I mean, it is a sad thing, and it's something that probably is a concern, but it wouldn't necessarily be a relevant consideration in terms of whether you were violating the speed limits. So, I don't know, like in some cases though, when you're asking for a special form of accommodation, it can be merited if it's really serious enough. Like I broke my leg so I couldn't come to class. Okay, well, fair enough. Like that's not just an appeal to pity, but it's a valid excuse. So there's kind of like a dividing line there in terms of the seriousness of the condition that you're asking for pity about. But anyway, that's the point. And then some examples. Next up, let's say the popular appeal. Hey, Yelka, welcome back. Popular appeal. I think this one's not too hard to explain either, but you can say a word about it and then I'll expand on it a bit if I can. Popular appeal. Okay, good, Daniel. One appeals to popular opinion to gain support for their conclusion. It's like saying something is true or correct or good just because it's a popular thing. And that's not necessarily always true. Like if you say this is the best movie because it's #1 at the box office, or this is the best song or artist because it's charting #1 on the charts, or this is like a better phone because it's selling more units. I argue to you that God exists just because it's a popular thing that most people believe. Now, sometimes popular things are like true. But if they are, then they can be argued for on independent grounds, right? So like if the iPhone is better than the, Android, it's not just because it's more popular, it's because it has features and stuff that make it deserve that additional popularity, right? So pointing out that something is simply just popular and that's the reason that it's true is not ever a good argument. And after all, sometimes popular things can be false. Like if you had lived prior to 1920, the prevailing opinion in US society would have been that maybe women shouldn't be voting. And if you go back further in time, that maybe people should be segregated or enslaved. So referring to the popular opinion is not necessarily to refer to the truth. You have to make arguments on independent grounds. Okay, so next there would have been the appeal to ignorance fallacy. What do you think could be appeal to ignorance? Somebody argues that something is true, but based on what reason? Not a good reason. What is appeal to ignorance? Yes, that's right, Daniel. One argues that something is true simply because nobody has proven it false. Or one could also do it where you assume or argue that something is false just because no one's been able to prove that it's true. Here's one, okay? Like somebody says, I think there was rampant fraud in the 2020 election because you can't prove there was not. There's no way that's a good argument. You have to have actual evidence of fraud on a wide scale, not the inability to demonstrate otherwise. And so in general, anytime you bring a claim forward, you have to have actual evidence that supports it, not just an absence of evidence to support the opposite. If I was to say to you right now that there's aliens somewhere in the universe because can you show me that there's not? No. Therefore, I'm telling you that that's the proof that there are. Real evidence of aliens existing would be something that shows signs of life, not just an absence of contrary evidence. You know what I mean? So overall, this is a bad way of arguing. Sometimes people get into this mode of thought that like the default assumption is that something is true unless you can prove it's false. Only in law do we grant the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, but in everyday life, we don't just say something's true unless you can prove otherwise. Otherwise, it would be so a simple matter to prove all kinds of things. I could stand here and tell you that, God exists because you can't prove he doesn't, or I could say God does not exist because you can't prove that he does. It would just be a sort of absurd way to proceed. We have to have real evidence in favor of something before we say we've got a good argument for it. Okay. What is hasty generalization? Yeah, what do you think? Hasty generalization. But by the way, you know, my example, in a way, it's not even perfect, because I said, oh, someone could say there was fraud because you couldn't prove there wasn't, but they did prove there wasn't, because it was completely audited and the courts, you know, investigated these claims, even the Department of Justice under Trump. So anyway, but it would have been a bad argument if someone had said that. Okay, so Delilah, when we make a universal claim based on a sample that is too small or that is not representative, yes. So hasty generalization is like jumping to a universal conclusion too fast, too quickly. You make a generalization based from a biased sample or a sample that's too small. Okay, so like, let me throw this one out at you, because I was thinking this might be a fair example. What if somebody says to you, you know what, I was looking in the local news and I heard a story about a pit bull that attacked like a little baby and killed it. And a couple years back, I heard another story about like someone's pit bull got off the leash and attacked like a woman and, you know, mauled her. So looking at those cases, I'm going to say pit bulls are just vicious. They're brutal, vicious animals. You should not get a pit bull. Now, look, is that a fair conclusion based on two cases? Not necessarily. As you guys maybe know, there's a lot of people that are very happy with their pit bulls, and that they're sometimes very loving and, you know, caring animals. I've had friends with them and stuff, and surely, yes, they can be big and kind of physical, but with proper, you know, care and training, there's no need to necessarily worry about them. But anyway, that's something that someone might say. You know, I've read in the news one or two cases, so I jumped to this overly broad conclusion. Maybe they had a few bad experiences with a member of, you know, a given profession, and they sort of think that everyone from that profession has that quality. In general, when you make universal claims or statements like all dogs or all pit bulls are brutal, you'd have to have extraordinarily strong and widespread evidence that's not contradicted. But oftentimes people want to reach for a broad conclusion based on insufficient evidence. So hasty generalization. Next, what is straw man? Straw man fallacy. Straw man, I wonder what that is. What do you think? Let me know. Good, okay, Daniel, thanks. When you distort or misrepresent your opponent's argument to make it seem easier to refute it. Okay, so when someone gives you an argument, if you take their actual argument and you distort it so that it sounds worse, you're doing straw man. I don't know, like somebody says that like they don't agree with the concept of having a border wall because they don't think that it's effective and that it will cost too much money. And someone says, so what you're saying is that we shouldn't even try to stop people from coming into the country without controls, then we'll just be overrun by too many immigrants. So that's totally a crazy argument. But to say you don't agree with one method of immigration control does not mean that you don't believe there should be any such controls at all. And so that would be a straw man argument. A lot of times people don't want to take on their opponent's actual argument, but they want to take on like a fake version of it that sounds way worse. And that happens all the time. It happens too often. So when people do this to you, you have to correct them and say, I'm sorry, but don't misrepresent my argument. That was a straw man and didn't argue for that. Maybe someone has said that, like, I don't know, here's another case. Somebody says, I think we should redirect some of the funding for police departments away from these heavily militarized tools that we give them, like kind of like tanks, heavy weaponry, body armor. Maybe you think that's something that we should leave to, you know, the military, but it makes the police force too aggressive and hostile. So I would advocate for redirecting funds away from that type of force and to support other types of services for the community. What do you think? And someone says, okay, yeah, you want to eliminate the police. You want to just get rid of them completely. What a crazy thought. What are you going to do the next time that you need 911? Are you just going to kind of try and take care of it on your own, so that's a bad argument. But the person didn't say eliminate the police department. They just said maybe shift funding to different priorities within the police force. So again, it could be a straw man. Okay, let's ask, what is red herring? Red herring, one more fallacy of relevance. The red herring fallacy. Good, Delilah, right. Sidetracking an argument by bringing up a different unrelated topic. So it's kind of like when you try to change the subject to something else that you think is more favorable for you. I see it happening a lot of times, and it happens everywhere, but one place where I've seen it happen is like in politics. I remember famously when Trump was debating, well, pretty much anybody, but we'll talk about Hillary Clinton. They would ask him stuff about his financial record and whether he was going to release his taxes. And he would say, well, you know, about that, the real problem is Hillary and her emails. When is she going to release those? I call on her to release those. But that's changing the topic. We were asking about your taxes. And now you're saying, well, that's not a big deal because look at my opponent. Another case, maybe to flip the script, with Biden recently in a press conference, they were asking him, what do you think about the border issue? Do you think that there's an influx of migrants coming because of your changing policies? And he's like, well, you know, the real issue, though, I think that everyone wants to focus on right now is the coronavirus and COVID. So that's where my energy is, and no, that's not a problem. But again, it's just changing the topic to something else. So red herring, when a person tries to distract from the main topic by bringing up an unrelated issue. It refers back to a tactic used by hunters when they would bring these smelly little fish, herrings, to try and distract bloodhounds from the prey that they're supposed to retrieve after the hunter shoots it down. And a good, well-trained hound is not going to be diverted from the main thing by the scent of the herring. But if they're not as well-trained, then the herring will distract them and they'll lose sight of the main target and go over there. So metaphorically speaking, when you're in an argument with somebody, got to make sure that they don't veer off track by bringing up other unrelated tangential issues, which would be like the red herrings. Okay, so next we can ask, what is a fallacy of unwarranted assumption? So the third category of fallacies are these fallacies of unwarranted assumption, and then you just tell me what you think that is. Fallacies that contain something. Okay, good, Daniel. It's when an argument includes an assumption that is not supported by evidence, not supported by evidence. Unwarranted means not justified, not well-based. So a fallacy of unwarranted assumption is a fallacy, it's an argument where there are assumptions in there that are not based on solid evidence. Okay, so one of them, the first, we can say begging the question. Who knows about what begging the question is? Begging the question. What is this? Just let me know when you think you got it. Begging the question. Just take a moment and let me know. I'm just looking through my notes at something else. Yeah. Begging the question, circular argument fallacy. What is it? Good, Ashley, thanks. So it's when one of the premises of the argument is just a restated version of the conclusion. Right. So remember, in an argument, the conclusion is the thing you're trying to prove. The premises are supposed to be evidence that supports that. But obviously, the evidence cannot be the same thing as the conclusion. Otherwise, it's not a different reason. It's the same thing. So that means it would go in a circle. What if I told you that, let me think here. The Lakers are the best team in basketball because there's no team that's better than them. That's not saying anything different. The premise is there's no team better. The conclusion is, therefore, they're the best. But that's just the same. This is a slightly different way of saying the same thing. So I haven't really given you any reasons to support this conclusion. I've just said it is true because it's true. And that's a begging question argument. We see it sometimes also when a definition of a term is more fully stated in one of the sentences, but it amounts to the same thing. Like if a person said abortion is wrong, and you ask them why, and they say, well, it's wrong because it's simply just not right to end a pregnancy. But ending a pregnancy is an abortion, and being not right is equivalent to being wrong. So the person says it's wrong because it's wrong. You could have given a better argument than that if you really thought it was wrong. You could have given independent grounds to support that claim. But when you beg the question, the argument is based on information that's not different from the claim itself. Okay. Yeah, I guess I can say that's good enough. So next, inappropriate appeal to authority. What would that be? Inappropriate appeal to authority. Person's trying to support their argument, but by doing what? They're trying to support their argument, but they're getting support in the wrong way. What do you think? Okay, good, Daniel. When we cite the view of an authority, quote unquote, to support our claim, but that person's not an authority on the subject, yes. A politician says, you know, these masks, I don't know if they're even really good for you. Maybe they'll make you get sick. But then you ask yourself, why would I listen to this person's view? Since after all, they're not a medical expert or an expert on virology. The people you should be listening to are the credentialed scientific professionals that are career, pros at like our big scientific agencies that are telling you what the right protocols would be. So if you say, hey, look, my mayor said that a mask is not necessary, this would be an inappropriate appeal to authority. Or like, oh yeah, my priest or pastor said there was no need for a mask. People are not scientific experts, so you're relying on a false authority. More kind of trivial cases, I guess. People like sometimes cite the view of one individual that's a pro in one field, but they cite their expertise in a different field that they have no knowledge about. It'd be like saying, hey, Dr. Vulich was telling me all about chemistry, which I know nothing about, except for some basic facts, I guess. I did take chemistry in high school, but I struggled. So I wouldn't be the person to refer to if that's what you're looking at. So in general, make sure that if you cite the view of an expert, that they actually are someone who has authority on that topic. Otherwise, it's an inappropriate appeal. Loaded question. Who knows what is loaded question? It's when you ask a certain type of question, but you'll say what that is. Okay, Delilah, when you ask a question that assumes an answer to a different unasked question, right? Loaded questions are questions that have assumptions built into them, and the assumption is about something that you don't know yet. So let me see, maybe this would be a good chance to ask you to try and throw in some examples. Can anybody please give a loaded question like in this chat here, and then see maybe some little examples of that? Try to ask a loaded question. Let's see a loaded question in this chat. How many loaded questions do you ask in a given day? Okay, what vaccine did you get? That's interesting. Yeah, that could be a loaded question. If you don't know whether the person has been vaccinated, then asking which one could be assuming too much. Ashley, what are you wearing to prom? Okay, if you don't know whether the person's even going, then this could be a loaded question. Obviously, some people either don't choose to go or don't get invited or something, so that's a possibility. Have you stopped mistreating your pet? Right. Well, in a case where one assumes that they have been mistreating their pet and they don't already know that, in law courts sometimes, or in dealing with law enforcement sometimes, we are trapped into leading questions, which are kind of the same. Like if the officer says to you, do you know how fast, like, why were you speeding so fast, or something like that? And you're thinking, I don't know, I thought I was right at the level or just below. So the question, why was I speeding, is a loaded question because he's trying to get me to confess by offering a motive for something that I'm not claiming I did. What is your dog's name? Sure, if you're not even aware of whether the person has a dog. Although I gotta say, that's a sort of strange one, because is it generally assumed that people have dogs? I mean, a lot of people do, I guess, but some people have cats like me, and then some people just don't have pets. But yeah, fair enough. That would be a loaded question in case you did not know that. Okay, so good examples. You know, like how many different drugs have you done? You know, when did you lose your virginity? There's all kinds of examples that people could give. But anyway, you probably know them when you see them. Next up, false dilemma. Yeah, false dilemma. What do you think? What's that? Maybe how many drugs have you done, if I think about it a little longer? I mean, you could just say 0. But if maybe someone said, what is your favorite drug? Then that would, I guess, be a loaded question, because that would imply that you're a drug user and you sampled even more than one. But anyway, I digress. Back to the question, what's a false dilemma? It's like kind of there's some complexity, but it gets reduced. How would you put that? Okay, yeah, so good, thanks, Delilah. When a person reduces the responses to a complex issue to like a simple binary either or choice, correct. What if somebody said like, look, you've got to either be like far left or far right, but I haven't seen you posting online about any of like the progressive causes. So I think you must be like a hardcore right-wing nationalist. That would be a false dilemma, because obviously there's a whole realm of like moderate, middle ground, independent, unaffiliated people politically. So construing it as you got to be on one of the political extremes would be a false dilemma. Or, you know, how do you feel about me? Do you love me or do you hate me? I mean, you can be honest with me. Is it is the love fest, or is this hate going on? Well, that's another false dilemma probably, because, you know, sometimes people don't have strong, passionate feelings of positive or negative regard, and it's just kind of meh, just neutral, you know? So that's the sort of format of false dilemma. There's a middle ground that's ignored in the way that the options are presented. Sometimes, when you're taking surveys even, you can see that the false dilemma fallacy is built into the questionnaire. If they give you sorry, I'm getting hiccups, but sparkling water in the morning, I got to kind of work on that. But anyway, back to what I was saying. Questionnaire that you see in a survey could ask you questions that don't give you a third option, and then you could say, well, I don't know, this is a flawed study. Like if it says, what do you think? Are we too permissive about immigration, or are we too harsh? And you're thinking, well, I don't know, I thought that our policies were pretty much right down the middle, just right. So if you only let me say either too harsh or not harsh enough, I think that it's eliminating the actual response that I would have wanted to give. So anyways, false dilemmas all around. Make sure that you don't get trapped into all or nothing thinking, or allow people to put you on the spot by giving you, you know, a poverty of options when they're asking you about your response to an issue or whatever. Okay, so then it's questionable cause. So what do you think is the questionable cause fallacy? Questionable cause. Person's assuming something without a very good reason. What is it? Questionable cause. Wait for it, but you'll tell me, right? There you go. Ashley, good. So when somebody assumes without good evidence that something is the cause of another thing, right? Think of, like, for example, superstition. That could be one case. A person, they like knock on wood or something, and then they pull the slot machine and they win. And they think, you know what, I knew it. That was like my good luck that led to me winning. But obviously that's not a reliable way of inducing a win. Otherwise, people would win every time they did it, and they would break the casino. Or maybe a black cat crosses somebody's path, and then later in the day their car gets broken into, you know, like mine happened. And since they're superstitious enough, they're like, yeah, I knew bad luck would come because the cat crossed my path. That happened. Later I got the car break in. So, you know, I'm putting two things together. That was the cause. But obviously the person that breaks into the car has no awareness and couldn't possibly about whether or not a cat crossed your path. This is not the causal basis for the action. Otherwise, everybody who owns a black cat would constantly be suffering all kinds of loss and bad luck. But there's a lot of cat owners anyway, and that I even know, and that have black cats. It's certainly false. So anyway, yeah. Sometimes people like to associate one thing as the cause of another without solid reason or evidence. When we do it, it's questionable cause. You know, sometimes when I think about this, I think of correlation is different from causation. The other day, okay, so you guys know about how like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was paused. And I saw like one graph that someone had posted somewhere like on Twitter, and they tried to make the argument that if you look at the graph, vaccine rates were like steadily increasing, and then like right around the same date that they pulled Johnson & Johnson for safety reasons, put it on pause, it's like it plateaued and started to decline. And then like some people were saying, well, there you go, that's the cause. People were scared of the vaccines after they heard about Johnson & Johnson and decided they were going to start delaying their decision to get it. But it seems, in my view, and others have argued the same, that this is a case of correlation that's not causation, because there were other factors that sort of coincided with that time point, like the leveling off of the population that's really most affected, or the people that are the most vaccine ready had already been receiving the vaccine. So it kind of coincided with that time point, but it's not necessarily the cause. Anyway, or at least it would take more argument to show that it was really the cause. So anyways, let's continue. Slippery slope. Anybody? What is the slippery slope fallacy? It's another assumption. The assumption that if what? Okay, good. So the assumption that if one type of action is taken or allowed, then eventually all types of this action will be permitted or will be taken, right? So it's usually like a sort of overly pessimistic prediction of a bad sequence of outcomes if one thing is allowed to happen, or one type of thing is allowed to happen. People had said that if gays are allowed into the military, that's going to lead us to having a dysfunctional force, and therefore to have a lack of military capability, but that is false. Some people say that, you know, if you, let's say you're on fitness, you're into a fitness routine and a good healthy diet, and then you're going to have one of those what they call cheat days. Or someone who says, don't give in to the cheat day, because the thing is, once you have that nice dessert, it's going to lead you to fully giving up on your diet, and eventually you'll just have to like lose all the work and all the gains that you've made. So don't even take one little snack, because it's bound to lead you on to like the total dissolution of your diet plans. Not necessarily, right? So sometimes people overhype the possibility of negative results from doing one thing or allowing one thing. When gay marriage was federally legalized in 2015 by the Supreme Court, some people, you know, argue, oh, well, if you open the door to different forms of marriage aside from the old school, you know, heterosexual monogamous relations, then maybe eventually people will be able to marry their family members or their appliances or their pets. And so we can't go down that slippery slope. But anyway, these would all be overly, cynical, pessimistic, and hyped up, unrealistic predictions of destruction or some negative outcome. Slippery slope. Think of a person standing atop a high slope that's slippery, and if they take one step, they'll fall all the way down. Metaphorically, that's how it goes. Someone's saying to you, don't take one step in that direction because it's going to lead to a whole worse sequence of events afterwards. But that's usually not always true. Okay, then the naturalistic fallacy. That's the last one from this topic. So what is naturalistic fallacy? It's an assumption that anything that is something is whatever, but yeah, just tell me. Naturalistic fallacy. What do you think? Okay, good. Thanks again, Delilah. So it is the assumption that whatever is natural is good, and that whatever is unnatural is bad. Yes, see what you wrote. Gabriel, no worries about typo, but yeah, the assumption that whatever is natural is good and whatever is unnatural is bad. Which is not always true. And in a way, it's not even necessarily true most of the time. I mean, think about all the things from nature that are so bad and not good for us at all. Earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, volcanoes, all kinds of pathogenic diseases, pestilence, famine. So a lot of things can happen that are given to us by nature, but they're not good for us. On the other hand, there are a lot of things that we invent that are not handed down by nature, that are like artificially created by man or technology, but they're good for us. So if you really think everything that's not natural is bad, then turn off this computer and just go to the woods, because this technology that you're using is totally not just found in nature. It's not something that is just going to occur naturally. It had to be created by us. But when you think of like communication systems, transportation systems, modern medicine, telecommunications, global satellites, these things all really enhance our quality of life. And I would say it's probably a lot easier to live in like a sort of advanced modern civilization than to live in the agrarian type of rural setting that our ancestors lived in. You would have just been a farmer. Not to say there's anything wrong with being a farmer, but we have obviously a lot more options, and the lifespan that we live is longer. The tools that we have to make our lives easier is much better. So naturalistic fallacy just assumes anything natural's got to be good and whatever's unnatural's got to be bad. Sometimes marketers and advertisers play on our tendency to think this way, and they will market us products that are not even good for us by saying they have something natural in them, like, oh look, all naturally grown tobacco, or this big slab of red meat, oh, it's all natural beef, as if it didn't have the same kind of possible cholesterol or whatever. So naturalistic fallacy. Next, okay, so with that chapter behind us in the review, there's some stuff about chapter 10 and 11. I did not have a lot of questions about the media stuff because I thought that I wanted you to mostly focus on your homework assignment doing the ads and things. But media literacy is just the ability to understand and critically analyze the influence of media on you. Product placement, that's when they put the product that they're advertising in the programming itself, instead of like during official commercial breaks or designated ad time. So, like if you're watching a movie and one of the characters starts drinking Coca-Cola that busts out like an Apple computer, these are all based on, licensing agreements between the broadcaster and the vendor of the product or service. And that's like a placed ad that occurs within the content that is the entertainment content. Sometimes we also see it in sports when jerseys or even physical barriers in the field are embossed with like logos of corporate sponsors. NASCAR would be a conspicuous example of that too, with the cars showing these decals. Okay, so it's hard to get away from product placement because it's in the media that you want to watch or view. So it's an effective advertising tactic. It's hard to get away from it. Okay, so next, 3 main purposes of ads. Ads can be designed to simply create product awareness, or they could be designed to inform the customer about the product or service, or they could be just to stimulate consumer demand. If you look at an ad which just shows like the Coca-Cola logo, it's not telling you why it's a good flavor or what it has in it or something. It's just reminding you of the name, and therefore that's to create product awareness. Sometimes you see ads that try to inform you all about the product or service. Think of like infomercials where they're saying, oh yeah, this thing chops, dices also peels. It'll be great. It'll speed up all your work in the kitchen, and they talk to you about it for like 20 minutes during the thing. So that's like really about product information, and there's some ads that emphasize that. And then you have some ads that just try to generate consumer demand by making the thing look cool, hip, or maybe enticing you with some type of sweepstakes or something that is attached to the purchase of the product. And of course, ads can achieve more than one of these in a single setting or in a single case. Next, there was chapter 12, which is all about science and pseudoscience. And let me think. There's different assumptions of science. One assumption of science is what's called unity. And that's the assumption that the universe is unified overall, so that eventually there would be one set of physical laws that could explain everything. We haven't quite gotten there yet because we have quantum physics and the theory of relativity, which are different, but eventually we hope and believe, scientists do, that there will be one uniform set of physical laws that could explain all things. Limitations of science. There's a couple ones that were mentioned in the book. One of them could have been the idea that science assumes the existence of the external world, which of course we all assume, not just scientists, but it's assumptions like that that cannot be absolutely proven, but they have to be made. Because if you were in a simulation or whatever, then I guess it would appear to be the same as the actual experience you're having now. So we couldn't verify, I guess, from the first person point of view that there was an external world. Nonetheless, we have to assume that, and so does science. Also, science can only study things that are observable. So if there's anything in this world that's not observable, if there's things like souls, ghosts, God, angels, devils, you know, I'm not saying these are true things, but if there were, then there wouldn't be no ways for science to investigate it because it'd be outside of the physical or the observable realm. Even scientific concepts like dark matter would be tough to fully understand according to the limitation that we can only study the things that are either directly or indirectly observable. And some people also criticize the assumption of predictability, which is the assumption that natural laws never change and they hold forever. Because, you know, how can you really say you know that if we haven't seen what will happen in the future just yet? Maybe the scientific and natural laws won't hold forever, but again, science presumes and just assumes that they do. So what is the scientific method? Well, you know, there are other questions on the study guide that go into the specific steps. But in a general sense, the scientific method is just like a procedure which tries to give a testable explanation for an observed phenomena, starting with observing the phenomena, trying to create a hypothesis to explain it, and then eventually testing the hypothesis to see if it's true. And the next topic on the list asks about how the critical thinking process is similar to the scientific method. And there are similarities because there's 3 essential steps in critical thinking. There's experience, interpretation, and then analysis. And that is kind of in a way similar to 3 big steps in the scientific method, which is observation of a problem, hypothesis, and experiment. So in both of the first steps, you just identify something happening without yet trying to figure out why. In both of the second steps, you try to give initial interpretation of why you think it did happen. That's either interpretation or hypothesis. And in the third step of both, you're now going to evaluate the interpretation or hypothesis by checking it again. So that's what analysis does, and that's also what experiment does. Okay. First step in the scientific method, identifying a problem. Science is all about giving testable explanations for observed things. And so you have to start with some phenomena in the world that you don't know how it works. So in science, we start by observing the world and pointing out, noticing something there that we don't understand. The second step, developing an initial hypothesis. What is that? Can someone say what it is to develop an initial hypothesis for an observed problem? Developing the initial hypothesis. What do you think on that? Right. So a person develops an educated scientific guess to explain the occurrence of the phenomena. Monica, you say asking a question without testing it first. Well, asking a question, it's trying to provide an answer. The question is the first step. Why is this thing happening? Like, why is the volcano erupting? Why are the bees dying off? The question is the first step, because you identify the problem and there's like something you need to explain about why it happens. The second step is when you give the initial educated guess, which is the answer to the question. So like the hypothesis is not the question, but the answer, or it's an attempted answer. So it would be like saying, oh, the bees are dying off because we got 5G towers of cell phones, or the bees are dying off because global temperatures are increasing and it messes with their life cycle. So a hypothesis is an attempt to explain why the thing happened. So that's right, Delilah. You develop this educated scientific guess to explain the occurrence of a phenomena. Then eventually you're going to test this hypothesis. That's the fourth step. So a test of a hypothesis is just creating an experiment that you're going to conduct, either in a real setting or in a lab, which will be able to confirm or disconfirm the hypothesis. And then finally, the last step of the method, the fifth, is when you evaluate the hypothesis based on the results of the test. So when you run your experiment to test the hypothesis, it might verify it or it might not. If the experiment confirms the hypothesis, that's success. So then you would publish this finding and you would put it forward to the scientific community so that hopefully they can replicate the findings on their own. And then that makes greater confirmation, it leads it to being a theory. On the other hand, though, maybe your hypothesis was disconfirmed by the experiment. If so, then that hypothesis was not correct. So which means you have to go back to develop another hypothesis and repeat the steps again until you get a verified hypothesis with an experiment. Okay, now there are different qualities that good hypotheses and theories would have. One, the first one mentioned, was relevance to the problem being studied. I kind of thought that one was just so obvious it almost didn't need to be mentioned, but yes. If you're going to create a hypothesis, it obviously has to be related to the thing you're trying to study. So it has to be like within the same ballpark of information. If I'm trying to explain why bees are dying off, and then I start talking about something that's happening in outer space as the explanation, really not relevant, because none of those things can possibly have an effect on, you know, what's happening on the surface of Earth. Next, predictive power. So a good scientific hypothesis can be used to make accurate predictions of future events. Like meteorology allows us to predict weather. Astronomy allows us to predict celestial events like solar lunar eclipses, the passing of asteroids, and things like that. Okay, Nicholas Copernicus. Does someone remember what he discovered and what was so important about that? Let me know about, if you can tell me, Nicholas Copernicus, just a fact about him. Important figure in the history of science in the West, in the Western world. So yeah, Copernicus. What did he do? Made a discovery. Something you'll, I think, know. What was the major discovery of Nicholas Copernicus? Also Galileo, but the book really focused on Copernicus more. Right, he did discover the heliocentric model of the solar system, and that did replace geocentrism. Now I'll just ask you for one little follow-up. What does that mean? What is heliocentrism and what is geocentrism? If you could just define those two words, then we'll have all the info. Heliocentric model is what? And when it replaced the geocentric model, what did it replace? You just expand on them a little bit. So just two definitions. Heliocentric and geocentric. Okay, so heliocentric is that the planets orbit the sun. That's what heliocentric means, right, Monica? But what does geocentric mean? Okay, good. So to be clear, Monica, Delilah, yeah. And then instead of thinking that the planets all orbit the Earth, right? So prior to the discovery of heliocentrism, the dominant view was that the Earth was at the middle of everything, and it was because they thought that God had made the world for the sake of man, and that God would have put us right at the center because, you know, we would have been the main point of creation. So it was actually considered extremely contrary to the orthodox teachings of the church to discover that, we're not at the center. But, he used telescopes that were now being invented to, empirically prove this. And that was an important moment because it kind of paved the way for future scientific discoveries that would deviate from, like, church doctrine, major event in Western history. So then, materialism in science. What view is this? It's the view that all things that exist in the whole universe are just made out of matter, atoms. Even consciousness and thought is made out of matter. So that's what materialism is. It's the assumption that all things are made out of physical matter, even thoughts, and that means that there's no such thing as like a non-physical mind or soul. Okay, science, what is it? What is it overall? I think I mentioned before, but it is reasoning from observable facts to testable explanations for the facts. So you start by just noticing things, and then you try eventually to give explanations for them that you could test for how accurate they are. Okay, I could have maybe made this question a little more specific, but what I meant when I say science and religion, question mark, on the study guide, is like, what are the different views that people can have about the relationship of science and religion? And so there's like a menu of 4 possible options that were discussed in the book. One view is that if science and religion don't agree, like maybe about the age of the universe or the earth or something, or about whether there was a Garden of Eden or something, if they don't agree, then then one view is you would prefer science over religion in such disagreements. So you would side with the scientific view instead of the religious one. Another possibility is the opposite, to go with the religious perspective instead of the scientific one if there's a disagreement. Another possible view is to think that they don't interfere with each other because they deal with different topics. Like maybe science is about the physical and the objective, and religion is about the subjective and the moral and the spiritual. I don't know. And then a fourth possibility is to say that they actually agree with each other. If you interpret religion the right way, then its claims actually coincide with what science has discovered. Maybe that requires a little bit of a reinterpretation of some of the biblical doctrines, but they actually agree. That's another view. Okay. We know that a hypothesis is an educated guess to explain an observed phenomena. A theory, though, is different. It's similar because a theory starts off as a hypothesis, but when it becomes a theory is when it really gets a lot of confirmation. So a theory is just a well-confirmed hypothesis that's been proven many, many times. So hypothesis is an initial educated guess to explain the problem, whereas a theory is something that's been tested, and tested again, and seems to be well-confirmed. So it's a well-confirmed hypothesis, a theory. The third step of the scientific method would be gathering additional information to refine the hypothesis. That means that based on your initial collection of data, you may sometimes have to make an edit to the hypothesis, narrow it down, or make it more specific. So like what starts off as a hypothesis that a certain type of bat was the original source of the coronavirus, maybe it gets narrowed down to a subspecies of that bat once you start to actually investigate the types of animals that fall within that genetic classification. I don't know. So sometimes you got to make the hypothesis more narrow and more specific based on your initial data. Consistency with established theories. A good scientific hypothesis should fit in well with and not contradict other well-proven theories that have come before. It should fit in like a puzzle piece with the big structure of existing scientific knowledge. So a new theory that arrives to the scene should not cancel out or eliminate the already well-proven ones that we had before. It should add on to them instead of knock them out. Falsifiability. A good scientific theory is capable of being proven false. If there's no way to prove it false, then there's no way to test that it's true. Because a test, right, is to determine whether or not falsification happens. So you have to know at least what falsification would look like in order to conduct a test. If I say to you that bees die because of cell phone radiation, then that's falsifiable because I could perform an experiment which exposes them to that radiation. And if we don't see the expected results, then we could say the theory was falsified. But when there's no way of testing that something is false, then it's an unscientific claim because science is all about experimental proof. That's why astrology and stuff is not scientific, because they don't say, look, conduct an experiment, and if this is the result, that means the astrology is false. They just don't concede the point that there could ever be falsification. And that's why it's not a scientific claim. A person that believes in the paranormal is not going to say, look, here's the way you can prove there's no ghosts. I'm telling you there's ghosts, but do your own experiment and prove it for yourself. And if there weren't, this is what would happen. But they don't offer you the methodology by which you could even gain disconfirmation. So they're not prepared to test these claims. Okay, simplicity, sometimes known as Occam's razor. If you have two explanations for one thing, science prefers the simpler of the two explanations, the one that involves fewer assumptions. This is usually why like conspiracy theories and stuff are less reliable than just official accounts of things, because oftentimes they would require a whole bunch of additional assumptions that the official account does not require. Predictability. In science, it is assumed that established cause-effect relationships will be the same and they'll be repeatable forever, because the universe overall is orderly and predictable. Now, I noticed when I asked this question on a quiz and stuff, some people were saying like, okay, like, so if I take a marker and I release it, it will drop. I know you guys are thinking about the example I used in class, but one element of it that I think some people was lost on them is that it's not just about dropping it right now. The point of the example is that if I did this forever, it would keep dropping, that it would happen to infinity, because the natural laws will always last. So it's not just about what will happen if I drop it right now at whatever, 9:40 a.m. The point is, what if I kept doing it? What if I did it tomorrow, the day after, and on into the full future of time? The point is that these natural laws would never change. They're never going to deviate from the way they work, not today, not tomorrow, not forever. Okay. The assumption of objectivity in science is the assumption that we can, in fact, learn about the world as it really is, not just how it appears, but how it really objectively is, and that we can get to this truth with no bias. Pseudoscience is fake science. It's something that masquerades as science, a body of explanations that tries to look like science, but it is not, because it involves no experimental tests, it's not falsifiable, and whatever predictions are given are issued in such vague and ambiguous language that they would count anything to be confirmation and nothing to be disconfirmation. So think of astrology, tarot cards, crystal balls, psychics, numerology, and all the rest. Sir Francis Bacon, he created the steps in the scientific method, British philosopher and statesman. And then empiricism is the view that most human knowledge comes from observation and the five senses, and that's an assumption science makes too. Now after that, there's just the notes about all the recent material on chapter 9. So, you know, some of that I think is probably a little more fresh in your mind, but you'll see the topics that are written in the study guide, 26 possible little questions. Just a sort of grab bag of things since we're ending the meeting right now pretty soon. Ethics, the study of morality and moral concepts, moral reasoning, when you make a decision about what's right or wrong or about what you should or shouldn't do. 3 types of moral action: morally permissible, impermissible, and obligatory. You would say what they mean. You could even give examples if you had to, if that was chosen. Moral values, values that benefit you and others, and they're considered good for their own sake, like compassion, forgiveness, justice, tolerance. Non-moral values, they're goal-oriented, they're more self-interested, they're desired as a means to an end. Think of fame, wealth, popularity, prestige. The conscience, this inner source of knowledge about what's right and wrong that we should listen to. Even though sometimes it bugs us, it's a good thing to be in touch with our moral conscience. And it reveals to us moral sentiments, which are attitudes or emotional states that reveal to us a moral situation and make us want to do the right thing. So there's helper's high, a good feeling that comes from being helpful to people. Empathy, the ability to understand and care about the way people feel. Compassion, taking actions to relieve people's unhappiness or to make them feel better. Resentment and guilt and shame. You know, I wanted to include, in addition to resentment, moral outrage. So maybe you can please make a note about that. But moral outrage is when you see something unjust and then you become upset. You perceive something you see to be unjust and become upset. Resentment is similar to that. The only difference is that with resentment, you're the victim of the injustice, and that makes it more personal. Guilt is a bad feeling that comes from having committed a wrong. Shame is a bad feeling that comes from violating a social norm, but you can feel shame without guilt. if the social norm you don't think really reflects morality. Like maybe a person that didn't do what their parents expected them to do for a career makes them feel a little sense of shame in the family, but not really guilty because they know that that's not wrong in and of itself. There's different stages of moral development: pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional. You can look at what those are. It's like an evolution of moral thinking from it's all about punishment to it's all about fitting in to it's actually about universal moral principles that I can apply on my own. And then there's these different ethical theories. Okay, moral relativism says morality is not universal, but it's subjective. Moral universalism says the opposite, that morality is objective and it is universal. And the two types of relativism are ethical and cultural relativism. I want you to remember that there are criticisms of moral relativism. Like, if ethical subjectivism is true, then like you can't really say that such horrible things like rape, child murder are wrong. You can just say, well, they're wrong to me, and to some other weirdos, they're actually not wrong, and that's the end of it. But probably you'd rather say, no, that's actually wrong. It's not okay, even to the one person who does it. We shouldn't say that it's relative. So ethical and cultural relativism have that problem. Cultural relativism's problem is that you cannot criticize a whole society. So what if there's a society that executes gay people or sacrifices children or whatever, you know, holds women as like second-class citizens? You might think that's wrong, even if a culture has it as a norm. And then there are these different types of moral universalism. Utilitarianism, everything's based on promoting most happiness. That was founded by John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. Kant, the German philosopher who's described Kantian ethics. The categorical imperative has two versions. One says only act in a way that can be done by everybody. The other one says don't treat people like a means. And then you just have liberty rights, welfare rights, and virtues. Liberty rights, rights to be left alone to pursue legitimate interests like freedom of speech or religion. Welfare rights, right to be provided essential goods if you can't get them on your own, like food, water, housing, school, healthcare. And then virtues are just positive character traits like generosity, courage, patience, and etc. Good character traits that some people think you should build up if you want to be a good moral person. So tried to run through as much of the material in the second half of the list as I could. Some of it was a little condensed at the bottom, but anyway, we've already studied it before, so this was just to prime you again to get ready for the exam. So now we're done with time for the meeting anyway. I'll be in touch with you guys as I'm finishing grading this fourth homework, and like I say, I'll be done before Monday or so at the latest. And you'll have your final exam next week on Thursday morning. In the meantime, I'll be available anytime through email and stuff if anyone needs to check on their grades. If you have already and you're waiting for a reply, I'm getting to you. It's just been a crazy week kind of with a lot of final assignments and other emails coming into me, but I'll make sure to finish all those and clear my inbox by the end of tomorrow at the latest. So are we good to go then? If so, I'll let you guys go. Hey, one more thing too, if you could do me a favor at some point, just fill in the class evaluations if you can at some point. That's just helpful for us as a school and for me, so I appreciate it. But while you're getting ready to say goodbye, I'll just say to you guys, it's been a great semester with you. I'm really happy and we got to meet each other and that I could be a part of your guys' education. I'm wishing all of you the best, not just in this class, but in your other classes and in life going on forward. So I really hope that you guys at least learn a few things. It was nice to teach you, and hopefully some of these lessons will stick with you and you can use them in your own life. But let me know that we're good to go. I'm sorry to keep you a couple extra minutes. And whenever you say so, then I'll just close our stream. Maybe I'll see some of you guys around in the fall. I know that we'll be back in person, I believe, so I plan to be there if that's what happens. All right, Delilah, thank you. Thank you, Caleb, Monica, everybody else. I'll be in touch if you need me until I announce the grades are in for the fourth homework. Take it easy, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you, guys. Thanks.